The tribulation. It's a term often heard in Christian circles, and everyone seems to mean by it a 7-year-long ordeal they believe will start after Christians are raptured to heaven. But the great Bible teachers down through the centuries did not believe in a 7-year tribulation after the rapture. What will it mean for people's salvation if they were right and today's popular view is wrong? The noted Baptist Bible preacher Charles Haddon Spurgeon did not believe in a 7-year tribulation after the rapture. But the popular Abundant Life website today promotes the idea of a 7-year tribulation. Martin Luther, whose Bible reading led him to start the Protestant Reformation, never saw a 7-year tribulation in the Bible. But today's Bible Sprout website asks, "What is the tribulation?" And it answers, "After millions of blood-washed saints have been raptured from the earth to be with the Lord, there begins a 7-year period called the tribulation." Reformer John Calvin, who studied the Bible closely and wrote commentaries on its meaning, never saw a 7-year tribulation in the Bible. But popular modern preacher David Jeremiah says on his website, according to biblical prophecy, the tribulation is a 7-year period that will begin immediately following the rapture. But Bible translators and commentators for hundreds of years never saw a 7-year tribulation following the rapture. That includes such great names as Wycliffe, Jonathan Edwards, and Tyndale. They never saw a 7-year tribulation following the rapture. The Abundant Life website we looked at a moment ago says another name for the tribulation is the Great Tribulation. And at the bottom of the page that you see here, it cites Matthew 24:21. So let's take a look at Matthew 24:21 to see why Bible experts down through the centuries did not see a 7-year tribulation there. Those who did not believe today's popular teaching include the Reformers Luther and Calvin, Bible translators Wycliffe and Tyndale, Wesley, Knox, Sir Isaac Newton, Roger Williams, Jonathan Edwards, Matthew Henry, Albert Barnes, and Charles Haddon Spurgeon. Why did so many great Bible teachers not accept the view that's popular today? The best way to see what Jesus meant by the expression Great Tribulation in Matthew 24:21 is to compare his words in the other Gospels. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all report on what Jesus said on that occasion. The three accounts help to explain one another. Here we see the three Gospels side by side at the same point in Jesus' message. He actually begins a verse earlier by telling his listeners to watch out for the abomination that causes desolation, which Jesus explains in Luke as Jerusalem being surrounded by armies. The Jews viewed the pagan Roman legions as an abomination that did not belong in the Holy Land around Jerusalem. And it was those armies that would cause desolation to the holy city. We can see the meaning of the tribulation most clearly in a side-by-side comparison of Matthew and Luke. In both Gospels, Jesus says, "Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains." And he goes on to say, "How miserable those days will be for pregnant and nursing mothers." Then in Matthew, he says there will be great tribulation, and in Luke, he says there will be great distress. It's obviously the same message, because in both Gospels, Jesus says, Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. And the Lord goes on to describe the trouble they will escape if they flee to the mountains. He warns that it will be miserable for pregnant and nursing mothers. Pregnant women and mothers nursing babies are especially vulnerable when violence and hardship strike. And the hardship will occur because there will be great tribulation, according to Matthew, and great distress, according to Luke. For those expressions, great tribulation and great distress, our surviving Greek manuscripts show the word or expression megathlipsis in Matthew and megas ananke in Luke. But Jesus was not speaking Greek. He spoke a Hebrew or Aramaic word in a language familiar to his Jewish audience. Jesus didn't say either one of those Greek words, and no one today knows exactly what word he did speak. We just know the words the translators chose to use to put Jesus' words into Greek, and those two Greek expressions mean the same thing. So even though the King James Version says tribulation in Matthew and distress in Luke, many modern translations use the English word distress in both Matthew and Luke. The important thing to note is that this is the same message Jesus gave, as reported by Matthew and Luke. Neither one of them recorded everything Jesus said, but just some of the main points. And Matthew and Luke made different choices as to which words of Jesus to include, all under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. Each of them included some points the other left out. So comparing the two gospel accounts will help us to understand why and what Jesus meant by that great tribulation or great distress. First, it's very important to note that Jesus' words about the Great Tribulation were not spontaneous. He was actually quoting those words from the 12th chapter of the book of Daniel in the Old Testament. You can see here, with Matthew, Daniel, and Luke side by side, that each passage is talking about the same time of tribulation or distress. In fact, Jesus even mentioned the prophet Daniel in Matthew 24:15 as he launched into this discussion. Jesus was quoting and elaborating on what Daniel said about the Great Tribulation. It was a tribulation or time of distress that the prophet Daniel had already written about. So what the book of Daniel says about it helps us understand what Jesus was talking about. In Daniel 12:1, the angel tells Daniel, there will be a time of distress. And then he concludes that verse by saying, but at that time, your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered. So the angel speaks of the tribulation as a time of distress for your people, Daniel's people, the Jews. And in Luke, Jesus elaborates on that by saying, for there will be great distress upon the land and wrath against this people, the Jews. Jesus says the tribulation will come upon the people of Judea, who Jesus warned to flee to the mountains. The expression this people does not appear in Matthew, but Matthew does make it clear that it's about the Jewish people, because Matthew includes Jesus' words, pray that your flight will not occur in the winter or on the Sabbath. When Jesus spoke those words, the Jewish people were the only people on earth observing the Sabbath. They were the only people on earth who, because of their Sabbath restrictions on work and travel, the only people who would find it a hardship if they had to flee on the Sabbath. So Matthew 2 makes it clear that the tribulation is about distressing circumstances for the Jews. What would those distressing circumstances consist of? Jesus said many of them would be killed, would fall by the edge of the sword, and the rest would be led captive into all the nations. The Great Tribulation struck the people of Judah when Roman legions desolated Jerusalem, killing 1 million Jews, and carried off the survivors captive to be sold as slaves in all the nations. It's a fact of history, commemorated by the Arch of Titus in Rome, pictured here, showing Roman soldiers carrying off the treasures of Jerusalem's temple. The Jews who were carried off captive were sold as slaves across the Roman world among the many nations under Roman rule. Jesus said this tribulation would afflict both the land and this people, the land of Judea that he told people to flee if they would escape what is coming. Jerusalem, the capital city of that Jewish land, would be trodden down by the Gentiles, non-Jews. The Great Tribulation would consist of not just the suffering of the Jewish people in exile, but also their holy city, Jerusalem, coming under and remaining under Gentile rule. And this is where Jesus spoke of the time element. No, it would not be a 7-year tribulation. It would continue, Jesus said, until something happened. Until what? It began when the Jews of Jerusalem were taken away captive. So they're returning from captivity. They're returning from the nations where they were captive, would indicate the tribulation coming to an end. History tells us that Jews from all nations returned to the promised land and set up the modern nation of Israel in 1948. Jesus said the tribulation would include the city of Jerusalem being trampled by the Gentiles. But he also made clear that it would come to an end when the Gentiles would stop trampling Jerusalem and the city would be taken back by the Jews. The Gentile trampling of Jerusalem ended in 1967 when the restored nation of Israel captured the old city and ended Gentile rule. So the Great Tribulation finally came to an end. It went on for centuries, but it finally came to an end in modern times, with the people of Judah back in their land and in possession of Jerusalem again. But what about the rest of the description of that tribulation in Matthew and Luke? Matthew tells us Jesus said, "For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved." And Mark tells us similarly that Jesus said, "For in those days shall be affliction, such as was not from the beginning of the creation which God created unto this time, neither shall be. And except that the Lord had shortened those days, no flesh should be saved." The centuries-long tribulation upon the Jewish people began with the Roman legions slaughtering 1 million Jews when they desolated Jerusalem. But Jesus indicated it would go way beyond that, a slaughter so severe that no Jews would survive if it were not cut short. And that actually happened when the Great Tribulation reached its climax in modern times. After the German armies in World War II conquered towns in Eastern Europe, Einsatzgruppen, or special purpose units, followed them into each town, rounded up all the local Jews, and methodically killed them. And special camps extermination camps were set up for the sole purpose of gassing Jews to death and burning their bodies. It was dubbed the final solution to the Jewish question, and the goal was to eliminate them completely. Never before or since in human history has there been such a methodical extermination program aimed at wiping the Jewish people off the face of the earth. The Wikipedia pages on the Holocaust show two categories: concentration camps and extermination camps. The result of the extermination program was that some 6 million Jews were killed. If the victorious Allied forces had not stopped Hitler, no flesh would have been saved among the Jews. But the Lord saw to it that the killing was cut short. Some 500 years earlier, Reformation preacher John Calvin understood what Jesus was speaking about, that Jesus was talking about the Jews when Jesus said, "And except that the Lord had shortened those days, no flesh should be saved." Calvin wrote about this in his commentary. Christ says that unless God put a period to those calamities, the Jews will utterly perish, so that not a single individual will be left. But God did put a stop to the Holocaust when Allied armies liberated the extermination camps. Surviving Jews, the flesh that was saved, moved to the Promised Land to complete the fulfillment of this prophecy by taking back Jerusalem from the Gentiles. So what is the Great Tribulation Jesus foretold at Matthew 24:21? As the thumbnail image for this message sums it up, it is the centuries-long suffering or distress of the Jewish people, beginning with the Roman desolation of Jerusalem, climaxing in the Holocaust, and concluding in modern times with the restoration of Israel and Jewish Jerusalem. Noted Bible commentator Albert Barnes wrote in the mid-1800s, so he did not live long enough to see the Great Tribulation come to an end, but he understood what Jesus meant. In his commentary on Matthew 24:21, Barnes wrote, verse 21, "There shall be great tribulation." The word tribulation means calamity or suffering. Luke 21:24 has specified in what this tribulation should consist. "They shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles shall be fulfilled." That is, until the time allotted for the Gentiles to do it shall be fully accomplished, or as long as God is pleased to suffer them to do it. So Albert Barnes understood that the tribulation began with the Jews being led away captive and Jerusalem being trodden down, and would end when God would put an end to Gentile domination over Jerusalem. As I mentioned at the outset, this is not the view popular in the churches today. They put all the events of the tribulation after the rapture, when believers are safely out of the way. And the popular view today assures people who are on the fence that they can take a wait-and-see attitude rather than urgently embrace Christ today. It tells them if they're not ready when Christ returns, they'll have a second chance after the rapture. So they're thinking, sure, if my Christian friends and relatives disappear in the rapture they talk about, then I'll believe, just like the characters in the Left Behind movies. That idea of a second chance after the rapture is a key element of the popular view of the tribulation, as you can see here on the fandom wiki page devoted to the book titled Second Chance in the Left Behind Kids series. That book in the popular Left Behind series says that for those left behind after Christ had come to rapture his church, there is a second chance. But that's not what the great Bible preachers taught over the centuries. And that's not what Jesus says in the Bible. His parables all hammer home the same point. Be ready when Christ returns, or else. In the parable of the faithful and wise servant, the servant who isn't ready is cut in pieces. In the parable of the wise and foolish virgins, those who are not ready when the master arrives come looking for a second chance, but instead find the door shut in their faces. The Apostle Paul's first letter to the Thessalonians tells what happens to those left behind, and it is not a second chance. He says, "We who are alive and remain will be caught up in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. The day of the Lord so comes as a thief in the night. For when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them, as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape." So Paul says that those who are not caught up in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air face sudden destruction, not a second chance. Scripture makes clear they won't have a 7-year-long second chance after the rapture. So what they are told about the tribulation may affect how people respond to the gospel. If they can be shown that the tribulation is not what the popular teachers taught them, it may move them to decide now for Christ rather than wait and see. The understanding we've presented here also helps us grasp the meaning of current events as they continue to fulfill Bible prophecy. The events taking place today in the Middle East are better understood with a biblical view of the tribulation. If you've been listening to these popular modern preachers, you may be missing out on important insight into Bible prophecy. A correct understanding of Jesus' words may prove critical to you and your loved ones in the days ahead.
Pastor David Reed has authored numerous books, served as a contributing editor of Dr. Walter Martin's Christian Research Journal, taught at Spurgeon's in London, and pastored Emmanuel Baptist Church in New Bedford, Massachusetts. He now provides these worship services for individuals at home, and free to use by small groups and churches.
This Bible Nook ministry hosts a weekly remote Bible study and prayer meeting at 7 o'clock Eastern Time on Wednesdays during the months from September through June. You're welcome to join the informal study by phoning 951-799-9542 or by clicking the Zoom link posted on Facebook. Bible Nook also provides free online resources in the form of websites at a dozen different domains. At the tobbible.com domain, we provide a free modern Bible translation that's copyright free, the original Bible for modern readers. The Bible we provide at BibleForTheEndTimes.com can be read online or downloaded for free and features footnotes highlighting and discussing passages on the end times, the last days of this world, and other important prophecies. At DoorstepBible.com, we provide a free Bible in digital PDF format, like the others, with footnotes that enable you to answer Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses when they come to your door. Our AnswerJW.com website provides other extensive resources on that cult, including a free online version of the book, How to Rescue Your Loved One from the Watchtower. Our LeftBehindAnswered.com website examines the Bible verses related to that controversial new teaching. And our UN versus IL.com website explores the role of Israel and the United Nations in end times prophecy. Our ComeFollowJesus.net site offers an introduction to biblical Christianity for non-believers and new believers, and for all of us to review the basics of our beliefs. And our main website, BibleNook.com, provides links to all of the sites I just mentioned and features lots of other helpful material. Our videos of worship services and individual messages remain available for streaming at youtube.com/BibleNook and at facebook.com/BibleNookMinistry. These live stream services are aimed at providing traditional worship services for believers who otherwise would not have them because they're confined to the home or because they don't have a nearby church that sings traditional hymns and preaches Bible messages. And they're also aimed at reaching the world with messages proclaiming and upholding the gospel of Christ. We pay Facebook to boost our messages, and we pay Google to advertise our YouTube messages, with the result that the thought-provoking thumbnails, some of which you see here, reach millions of people. Toward the end of 2023, Facebook and Google reported more than 250,000 total views for our message on Israel and Armageddon. A flood of responses and comments, including from many non-believers and many comments from inside Israel itself, proved that this video got many people thinking and talking about the gospel message. The 250,000 views reported for that message shows that for a very small ministry with a very small budget, Bible Nook reaches a very large audience. During the year 2023, we received gifts totaling $5,326, and we spent $5,875 on web hosting and domains, post office expenses, Zoom, and our call-in conference line. But overwhelmingly, we spent that money on boosting messages on Facebook and YouTube. As you can see, we had a shortfall for the year of $549, but my wife and I were glad to cover that from our own personal funds to keep boosting messages that were generating so much interest. No one takes any salary from Bible Nook. To maintain our freedom of speech, we have not applied to the government for their approval as a ministry, but all the gifts we receive go directly to the expense of spreading Bible messages. If you are being blessed by this ministry, or if the Lord moves your heart to spend some of your resources on our gospel outreach, you can do so by visiting BibleNook.com and clicking the donate button on the home page, or by sending a check to Bible Nook, 214 Onset Ave, Suite 1464, Onset, Massachusetts, 02558.